Are you looking to improve your cybersecurity program or maybe any domain within the cybersecurity program? I wanted to showcase how we can build a better cybersecurity program or any specific domain within the cybersecurity program. So we will discuss various domains and how we can build a program that's essentially built upon quality. So quality is a metric that we'll use as a security improvement and essentially continual iteration of building better and more and aligned to business goals cybersecurity programs. So I'm sure most of you guys have seen the trend that nowadays is shown within the industry is that most of our organizations nowadays, to do business or to create new specific products, ISO compliance, requirements such as ISO 27001 or SOC 2 becomes sort of a requirement to do business between organizations, whether it's B2B or B2C. So we'll showcase how we can build a program that essentially does not look at specific compliance standards, but essentially aligns to compliance from the start. We will discuss how we can move from essentially firefighting and throwing money at specific solutions while trying to solve more incidents, close more risks, or reduce the bugs that are in your code. So essentially how we can build a quality metric within the cybersecurity, and instead of firefighting, actually elevate our program to the next level that allows us to better address these issues and essentially make a program future proof. So we'll jump right into it. So first part of the program is generating an executive charter. I'm sure most of you guys have heard, but security professionals normally come into various forums showcasing how they lacking support or how they lacking understanding around their cybersecurity program, how they're lacking, whether it's budget, whether it's support, or whether it's actually getting initiatives over the line. So I think executive charter is the first and the most important step that you take in your program build that essentially allows you to set expectations, to showcase the understanding around the cybersecurity program, and as well it gets all the senior executives involved in your cybersecurity program so you can get the support, the resources, and anything that you need to build state-of-the-art cybersecurity program and essentially move the business forward. How does that program aligns with your business goals, and how can you showcase the value and return on investment to your senior executives? So as you can see, the executive charter is based out of 10 steps. So first of all, the first part of it is the overall responsibility. So it's very important that senior executives understand that overall responsibility for information security sits within the board as senior executives. So you have to make sure that you explicitly tell in your executive charter that information security is responsibility of the senior executives and the board. And then the second part is that they mandate that responsibility for you as an information security leader or head of information security or whatever position is, that they mandate you that responsibility to get the program ready and up to scratch. Then the third part, we will define the security strategy and how we will achieve those goals. So where we can define the scope of our information security strategy and the program, what will encompass within that scope. Then we will address the authority that they give us. Essentially, senior executives and the board will have to give authority for us to act in implementing that information security program for us, and then we can showcase and get the buy-in from them for the resources and support that we will need. So we explicitly can call out what budgetary or what people resources we might need and how we will need to be supported in order for us to deliver that program. The sixth point is very, very also important. So I think most of the times we as senior security leadership, we always faced with problems that there are specific projects within an organization that we are either unaware, or we have not heard about it, or we have not been involved from the initiation. So number 6 point says that senior executives will mandate every single project lead to make sure that they involve security from the project initiation. Number 7 is very important as well, so making sure that information security has control over change, or over change management. So essentially we can say yes or no to specific changes. So that's very important, to make sure that we are aware of the changes happening and how we can whether stop them, or whether we can provide advice in specific changes that are happening in our environment. Obviously, 8th point is very important, because we obviously we all know that security can be overruled. We're not the department of no, we're not department of stopping everyone from doing the day-to-day tasks. But the key point is in here, we will mandate that it has to be a formal process followed, how security are accepted in specific, whether it's projects, whether it's specific, initiatives. So it has to be a formal process, documented process, that has to have a sign off from senior leadership that this specific security has to be accepted. Number 9, again, that's a very important point, visibility. As we all know, in specific, organizations, there's always, whether it's politics, whether there's specific conflict of interest, it's sometimes hard for security to gain visibility in order to detect potential, issues with broken business processes. So number 9 is you can mandate in the executive charter that senior leadership will provide you visibility in any single application, infrastructure within your environment without IT involvement. So basically that you can detect specific vulnerabilities, whether it's risk, whether it's misconfigurations with specific applications. So they give you essentially priority to gain visibility. And then the last one, another very important point, is daily operations. That's where we mandate who's responsible to specific daily operations. So we can expand into, for example, how does IT are involved in patch management, how does development are involved in the developing secure and quality code. So and it's very important, so we can set the standard of daily operations, and then whoever is within those daily operations, we can ask them to co-sign the executive charter that everything is documented. And that's the key point as well. All of this executive charter will be signed by your senior leadership, as well as people who are involved in the daily operations and management of those specific tasks that you listed. Therefore, it's documented, and nobody can hide behind, accountability, behind time. Everything is set. So you set an expectations of how information security strategy and the whole program will work for the business. So that's a very important starting point of getting your program up to speed. So the program management domain is essentially dedicated to the management of the program. So we often see that security programs are being scattered or lacking upkeep. Even in the best cases, the continuing management of the scope and the relevance is lacking. So which results normally in the business not being effectively protected. So the key point of this was to include 4 components. So it's the program overview, the continuous improvement, and the management system, as well as operations schedule. So the program overview component essentially presents the entire structure and full inventory of all the components. So the idea being is to have a full representation of all the components of the framework that leaves nothing else out. So it lists all the documents in the program, their purpose, their last update date, an illustration of the framework itself, as well as the recap of the strategy and the structure of the team and the stakeholders charged with executing the program. This document is normally a very important part, which you can hand essentially to your auditors along with the charter and the strategy documents that we discussed previously, to explain, what we're doing and why we're doing with our security program. It's a bit unconventional, but I think, normally auditors are very impressed if you actually document what we discuss throughout all of the business sort of domains within the program. And it can transform essentially your audits, whether it's internal or external, because that one document will showcase the whole program management aspect and how that program is set up. The second component is continuous improvement piece. So essentially it defines how the components, usually the documents, are added, how they are updated, and removed from the framework as well, how the associated processes, the frequency, how the versioning is to be tracked, and anything to do with that. So essentially the purpose is to to make sure that the framework remains up to date, it remains relevant and efficient. The third component is the management system. So it's just essentially defines the management system. It's just that, so essentially how we will manage the program's framework. So if you decades ago, essentially the framework would have been just a collection of documents in a folder and subfolders, and versioning would be done with folder hierarchy, or and the file naming conventions. Nowadays it's much easier to do that. We can build a program in programs like Atlassian, which has a Confluence tool. We can create schedules, workflows within the Jira as well. So it just essentially allows us to have direct contributions from around the business, easy sharing as well, and much more. So this way our program is much easier and manageable. And then the last component is the operations schedule. So this is another very important document where we use all the schedules for all the operational elements. So how often do you run your backups, your recovery tests, your potentially your incident response and tabletop exercises, your vulnerability scans, and so on and so forth. So essentially it's a schedule of when and how you do specific tasks within your operations. So you can essentially create, it's up to you how you're going to manage, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, or as I mentioned, pages like Confluence allows you an easy management way of documents, how we can make it shareable as well within the business, and just essentially create a schedule of all of your operations within your cybersecurity program. So that's very key, important point of the domain. So let's go into the next domain. So the next domain is essentially interdepartmental integration. So this came about essentially as there is a key departments that we normally have to work within security. So it's HR, legal, as well as sales. So it's just essentially creating a key focus areas around HR integration. So for example, how we're going to mandate acceptable use policy. We can create job role definitions, essentially that allows easy procurement of new roles, how we establish a disciplinary process, how do we, create an improvement culture within the business, how do we mandate security training, and much more. But essentially can include all of these areas that's done together with HR help. So it's essentially a key 3-department integrational document and procedures of how we do specific things. Then, legal integration can include things like GDPR. For example, how do we follow compliance? How do we address contractual issues, incident disclosure, contractual liability overview? So these are the key parts of legal integration. So it's not just dealing with potential legal issues, but just having an open dialogue with legal team to make sure that they are aware of the lot of things going on in the business, due to legal often being involved in some capacity also, So, and also normally as a bonus, your general counsel tends to have a seat at, whether it's board, whether it's exco, that sort of level, and they're normally listened to. So if you create a good relationship with the general counsel. You can get normally help with getting things across the line, especially if they are to do with compliance or to do with any potential legal issues in different, whether it's different geographies or within specific, frameworks. So that's very important. And then lastly is the sales integration. So we have to make sure that we, have an open dialogue as well, again, with the sales team to make sure that whatever they promise to potential clients, to potential customers, so that delivery matches the commitments that we have to our clients and customers. And then the last bit is we need to make sure that we involve to be a contributor rather drain to the bottom line. So that's where, there is another part of how we do commercial security and how we can commercialize our security, which kind of bleeds in between sales integration, but essentially it's part of it, how we, showcase our security prowess to our potential clients and customers. How do we deal with contract negotiations to making sure that security is addressed into our SLAs as well? How do we work with our potential clients to making sure that security is aligned with our expectations and with their expectations? So that's a key sort of department sort of integration document, and all of the processes that go along with it. So making sure that everything is documented is very important, and how we can elevate our program essentially. Then we come up to our IT operations domain. Probably this is one of the largest domains that we will do within our cybersecurity program. But essentially, this is where we put all of the IT operations and related support processes, standards, as well as guidelines relevant or essentially needed to support the security. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of components within the domain, but essentially hopefully gives you a sort of an impression of what needs to be within this document. But essentially it's a document where, as I mentioned, processes, policies, standards sit within the running of IT operations, or anything that has any sort of bearing within how IT operations are run or architecture, that essentially are relevant to information security. So as I said, it probably tends to be one of the largest parts of the framework, but the thing is, most of the actions, once they are defined, it should be responsibility of IT. So essentially, how do we mandate that responsibility? So we create standards, procedures, policies, processes, and then essentially we, IT operations run with it, as long as we define how security should be embedded within IT operations. So, it's important to note for operations, how we build and run things to be well, to be well defined, to ensure that both security and consistency is a key element, essentially, of quality, and making sure that we not allow, kind of entropy that leads to vulnerabilities, unknown issues, or even runaway of, shadow environments and things like that. So, despite such big importance, normally, such operations are often not very well documented. So it's very important, that making sure that documentation is very well done, it has enough detail and granularity, and making sure that it includes all of the security, considerations. So it's very important, to make sure that this document or this domain is populated, and it's great, sort of familiarization sort of exercise that you can do with IT processes and mature their documentation. So it becomes, a collaboration piece between security function and IT, and making sure that, it's defining how IT can produce secure, repeatable, and consistent output. So this is very important and one of the biggest domains within your information security program. And as you can see, it has a lot of meat in it. But once we define all of those, specific standards that we expect them in each of these, components to be done, then essentially IT can run with it, and then we just monitor the compliance and adherence to it. So the next domain is essentially software as a service and business applications. So that's where we house all of the business applications as well as any software as a service that we use. So as we all know, with the advent of the cloud, and more and more business applications essentially have become a cloud-based, and therefore they are hosted within their own environment and their own infrastructure, and essentially developed with their own standards as well as approaches. So it's very important, for program to, to have an individuality and address those specific problems. So, you know, address all of the SaaS applications that are used within the business. So normally how we can do is essentially we create a document for each application that is used within your business. So we use, business use case essentially for the application. We do a risk assessment of each application. We also define what data is processed and stored in each application. Also, we need to define the business importance and criticality of each of the application, as well as who will be using that application. So, the document also includes correct configuration for the application, specific user roles that we have for each application, as well as associated permissions. So, I just mentioned a couple of applications here, but obviously it can be any applications, whether it's something like Google Workspace, Confluence, or any specific, internally made applications that are used within the business. So it's very important to define how each application can be used, how it should be configured to make sure that it's secure, and how we define, provisioning access, specific roles, permissions. All of this is very important in how we use those applications within the business. So that's essentially domain dedicated to all of the applications that we use. Next is the product and engineering domain. I just wanted to add a caveat. So obviously, these are domains as, specifically tailored to specific organization. You might not have a product domain, you might not be shipping product internally. So you can mold how do you want, basically based on your internal organization requirements and based on, how do you work as a business. But, product and engineering domain, I think normally it's a beast in of itself. The amount of flexibility or sometimes even lack of accountability that some engineering departments are offered in the name of, accelerating innovation, and can be, absolute nightmare for any leader that runs, cybersecurity programs. So, and it's not only limited to, security problems either, although, sometimes businesses are unaware of the broad issues that are generated by those specific teams. So, it normally comes down to things like, lack of architecture and code quality, in that, many engineering functions seem to only be expected to deliver the requested functionality and do that very fast. So, normally we are faced with, hundreds and hundreds of, random system instances that are generated, then left, either unused, inefficient compute functions, that normally inflict, enormous spending and excess cloud billing, code also for the, full of vulnerable and sometimes, obvious security vulnerabilities, and, other sometimes unknowns. The platforms that can make, our engineers and DevOps, pull their hair out sometimes. These are normally just, the reality essentially of how, these departments work. And the thing is, they're rarely noticed by the business that can, make any concerned CISO, stew with frustration. So it's no surprise that, engineering departments are normally sometimes referred to, as essentially a fountain of risk. So in terms of security, for us being a quality function and helping reduce, essentially tangible business costs, and beyond this, just, reducing the risk, getting involved in engineering and product is also probably the biggest contribution that we as security function can do. So it's very likely to be the one that business will push back the most and the hardest essentially. So communicating the benefits here is essentially very, very important. And essentially it's often the department where all the deliverables are seen, and all the external costs it inflicts and normally is unseen. So we usually have to thread carefully, and we have to present a larger picture of where those costs are visible. We also have to make sure that we highlight that the things that lead to technical debt. The need for more computing costs, the less stable applications, the slow applications, more effort that we need to remediate issues, and every new change or feature will become just a little more difficult and time consuming and expensive to implement. So how we, highlight the quality that we can present and save those issues. I'm sure most of us seen, at first hand, how poor engineering practices not only result in huge number of vulnerabilities, but also, sometimes even 7-figure amount of excess of compute usage that we spend, cause the change request that should have taken days or even months to, due to excess complexity, burnout and turnover of staff, affected the viability or saleability of our product, and even sometimes bleed out the company's capital, that companies can go out of business due to poor practices. So this function or this domain is essentially of key importance of how we can showcase the program's viability as well as return on investment. So it's very important to to preach the quality function and establish essentially a very effective communication of security benefits to the business. And part of that is essentially is asking questions like, what minimum security features should all of the applications have, and essentially document that, document for each application and the platform it runs it, what authentication mechanisms we should have, what data flows and data storage standards we should adhere of. So essentially we're building a quality and consistency of development. So we set the rules around the libraries, around how we do code reviews, how we do testing regimes, and anything else that falls within secure software development lifecycle as well as engineering. The next domain is human factors. So this likely to be an unusual one for a lot of people, as the field of human factors normally is not one that's kind of widely applied or even recognized in most security functions. So the key is the sort of the field of human factors relates to things like human error and human behaviors that we need to understand. It deals with everything from essentially from training to understanding human behaviors to improving adhesion to instructions and processes that we build. How do we manage cultural change and many more. It's critical to understand how human factors will be in our security program will be highly dependent on our business, particularly sort of the level of organizational health. What we need to do with this function is also very, very widely on your business, on your people, and on your cultural challenges that your business might have, and in particular organization. So as a result, it can vary based on organization to organization, but essentially it highlights how security culture should be designed with the organization. How do we do security training across the organization, and how do we reap the most benefits of that training? How do we understand where we normally get human errors, and how we can do process engineering to make sure to remove the potential of human errors, as well as how we engineer those processes that essentially reduces the potential of human errors. And again, building relationships across the organization so we understand how each department works, what's the culture of that specific department, going away from all of the business culture as well. So it's important to essentially address and reflect on what's the general culture within organization. What are the reports within organizations? So once we look into sort of deeper and delve into those human factors, we can understand a lot of insights in what teams do within the business, how we can build relationships and trust so that people would share things with us. It's important to understand where there's potential processes are broken or where processes are not documented, how the sensitive data is being used within organization. It helps you, potentially uncover some serious practices that are, mistreated within organization, where there are significant, technological potential risks within an organization. So it's a key point to dedicate a person within your team who can, sort of permeate your whole organization and understand what are the human factors, understand whether, people are manipulating production data, or are they doing something that they're not adhering to specific processes, or where there's practices that there are no processes. So how do we build, those processes to make sure we have a repeatable behavior within our organization? So it's one that you probably haven't particularly noticed before, but I guess it's, from my point of view, it's very important to include in your organization program and potentially address those human factors, because as we start moving towards security as a sort of quality metric, humans are the ones that normally interact with all of the technology, because we all know it starts with people, processes, and then technology, and that's why the key goal of this program is going away from firefighting, is actually addressing the human factors, addressing the people first, processes, and then the technology, and that domain is essentially that key part of addressing those human factors. So it's very important, how do we build that specific domain within our organizations. Next is the SECOPS domain. So this domain is probably the simplest, one to understand for all of the security practitioners, because it's essentially what most people consider security to be in today's status quo. But as a CISO, I'd say that is what you delegate your head of security to manage that specific domain. So it best normally is to delegate it to an expert in security operations instead of running it yourself. And going through all of these specific domains again, it's important to note that building the whole program it shouldn't be a job of CISO or or whoever is the leader in security. Potentially parts of it, such as the charter or the management of the whole program, yes, but then you have teams who you can delegate and give them accountability and own parts of the program. So SecOps sits within the SecOps. You have product and engineering potentially with your engineers, or with your AppSec engineer, or whoever you have that potentially is running that part of the domain. So you can just coordinate activities and making sure that people have accountability and have a say in your program, how it's built. But essentially, this is where we define how we implement and configure and run and maintain security technologies, such as our general SOC setup, our SIEM, security incident and event management platform, our EDR, so endpoint detection and response, how we do our vulnerability management, application security testing, penetration testing, and any other sort of non-strategic security activity. Security operations leads as well, it's important that they should be mentored in providing as much of the strategic feedback as possible, and our business insights are critical to know where to prioritize operational resource. So just a simple example. So if our SOC is seeing high frequencies of certain element being, exploited, we should not just, combat those attacks day to day, but we should try and investigate the reasons for it. So essentially, any incident should become sort of a way for us to pull on a thread and understand why these specific incidents are happening, and how we can potentially build or fix the business processes that can address those specific incidents. So, our business knowledge essentially tell us which systems, users, or processes have the highest potential business impact on our operational security focus, or at least awareness should have some degree, concentration there. So this is one area where security that's, well serviced in terms of, knowledge, and as such, there is plenty of knowledge out there on how best run security operations and associated technologies. But it's important to understand that strategic aspects, it's important to address those strategic aspects of the program in order to to maximize the highest business value and addressing the root causes instead of just firefighting. So that's the way how we embed the quality sort of management within our security program. Next is the compliance domain. So as I alluded in the beginning, I think a lot of organizations build their security programs off the back of essentially third-party frameworks such as ISO or NIST, and I think that is where the big mistakes is for that is because those frameworks essentially lack focus in addressing business-specific systems or processes. So we within organization have a much more likely to have a complete holistic and appropriate coverage in less expensive and less disruptive ways by mounting essentially our bespoke framework or our reality rather than trying to retrofit some third-party idea of security essentially within our domain. So especially when you think normally security is mostly technical security controls with limited understanding of people and business, and essentially usually it's zero understanding of our people and our business. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing compliance though, but to the in the opposite, essentially the problem is that we normally, organizations or security professionals in some wrong ways nowadays, associate essentially compliance with a standard such as ISO, NIST, whether it's CMMC or Cyber Essentials and any of the ones. But essentially compliance is a measure or a process by which our reality essentially meets the defined and desired optimal or ideal state. So essentially what that means is that having those definitions of what good, as in secure, looks like for everything in our environment, it becomes crucial effort at compliance to yield any actual security. So it's why today's compliance really, if ever, equals security, and precisely to the point of our framework and its various domains. So to sum it up, essentially, our ultimate compliance goal is to be compliant to what we have defined in our framework. And then essentially what we do is we define our ideal state for each system, for each business process, and comply with it. And that's the compliance. It becomes a lot easier and better fit than trying to apply a generic control to every business process, by instead of molding our ideal state according to our business, we are far less likely to omit important elements or areas of our business than by basing ourselves to an external standard that has no awareness of them. So what it means essentially is that our compliance activities make more sense to others in the business as they are a direct reflection of it, which helps us to gain traction from stakeholders, as well as increases the likelihood that compliance will be maintained. So essentially what we do is just we create our compliance framework based on the unique cybersecurity program that we built, and then essentially what we do is we just map what good looks like and measure the drift. So what we do is essentially, if we try to go for specific certifications such as NIST or ISO, our program is already covered 90% probably of the requirements of each of these standards. So all we need to do is include what we don't have within our program from the standard, or just do essentially cross mapping between our program and these standards. So essentially it just becomes so much more easier and so much more less effort than creating specific projects for each standard that we want to adhere or our business wishes to adhere to. Next domain is the commercial domain. So there are a few simple questions normally that I always raise for myself or for my team. So, you know, whose job is to handle commercial aspects of security? Who is responsible for creating a brand value around our security? Who's responsible for answering any questions around security during the sales process? Who's there to improve the speed and quality in which those questions are answered? You know, uh, to ensure any commitments made in contracts with customers or with suppliers, are captured and integrated part of the security program. Whose job is to leverage security efforts as a competitive advantage. You know, who's there to make the arguments to leverage security to win tenders over our competitors. To raise public awareness of our security efforts resulting in our security offerings. And I think normally that should be sitting with security. So that's where that commercial domain comes in, how we can essentially convert some of the tender activities and sales activities and convert potential customers by showcasing our security standards, security quality. So it's not just essentially a significant contribution to the business, which we should be doing anyway, but it allows us to offset the cost of the security function, sometimes even beyond 100% of our security budget. It also means that we have commercial discussions with which cause us to be included and respected within the business and commercial verticals, as well as with senior management. We even more likely to be involved into strategy and project meetings if people think that we can potentially add revenue to what's being processed rather than merely assessing its risk and potentially slowing things down. So it's essentially changing the mindset of how security works. It's also helpful connection point to sales, marketing, product departments, which can be sometimes very hard to reach. So it's one of the newer domains, but it's probably one of the least normally established. But as such, you can expect a lot of variation between different organizations, and it can differ based on programs. But just sheer innovation around commercializing security can essentially transform. So some of the tips that we can include within the commercial domain. So, for example, we can include a document covering the overall commercial security and related messaging objectives. Essentially, we can create potential shareable studies or documents about potential risks that our customers face. How we shaped our security program team to address those customer risks, specifically highlighting ones that might face when doing business with our company. We can create a customer facing documentation on our full stack of internal security controls and practices and how we do security to essentially gain customer trust. We can create a definition of our brand values and how security features as part of our brand values. So that's an important message to come, to share across. We can even create, security messaging pages on our website, our potential public stance, how we address security. We can create even extensive RFI response documentation to help sales teams essentially to accelerate the sales process by preemptively certainly providing answers to common security questions. So elevating that speed and agility, how we can do sales. So it's very important, process. And I invite any security leaders to practice and add this domain to your security program. Put your sales and commercial and marketing hats and really think through the nature of your business to come up with ways where security and perception of security essentially could produce a competitive advantage to your business. Understand that how change management and security function can be normally phased out, but because we potentially create that communication with all of the departments, it can help create leverage as well as an advantage where, commercial teams can help us get our mission across to senior executives, because we are seen as an ally to our commercial teams. So, a solid demonstration of the impact of commercializing security, can give a huge impact to senior management, and just create a perception of value add, as well as, create a collaboration essentially, and view security as a great ally to do business. And then lastly, it's a department called the business subs, or essentially a domain called business subs. So this is where we feature essentially any other departments that have not been mentioned in any other domain. So it's not like really a domain in itself, but it's a repository or linking point to any other departments within our business. So it's important that other departments should be able to access, any relevant part of our framework documentation, and essentially ensure that they know the security standards and processes that we have defined. Also, essentially, we need the visibility into all of our other departments, that how they work, what business processes they have. So that stubs portion of the framework is a space where we can store and link all of the department essentially processes, inventories, and and all of the etc. and all of these documents. So essentially this helps us to to have the necessary visibility over the processes, as well as enabling to review them for any security potential concerns that we might have. We can even potentially think, how we can automate such alerts, in any changes in specific departments, so essentially it's a way where we can create either page or folder per each department, and essentially store any sort of documents within those subfolders. So essentially you have by this time, how you develop the program, you should have a sort of standardized way of how you build business processes, as I mentioned, whether it's Confluence, whether it's SharePoint, or any specific document storage tool that you might use for easy, connection and visibility of the process across, all of the departments you might have. So, there have been breaches of significant amounts of sensitive data due to, little known processes and tools that normally has escaped the security department. So essentially what it does, the respective of department, it saves the time, answering a wide spread of questions from us if we have a copy of the processes that we can essentially review by ourselves. What we can learn about the business through understanding how other departments operate, what data systems, and revenue streams they might have. It's essentially gives us visibility to the whole of the business, and then we can essentially refine, add the quality metrics, and add security in those processes, and review the potential risks or potential problems that might arise in the future. So that's sort of the last piece of our program. But as I mentioned, guys, you can style domains however suits your business needs or however suits your program. But these are the things that I just wanted to kind of highlight and showcase what you should consider in building your cybersecurity program, and enhancing that ability, essentially going from firefighting to actually building quality within your business, and how we can address security with quality. So pulling on those threads and essentially building processes with security in mind to look to the future. So instead of firefighting, we're creating a long-lasting effect of how our program will be viewed across the business, and making sure that we move away to from constant reactive into being proactive and addressing the problems within the business. So hopefully you guys learned something new within this video series, how we can elevate our security program to the new heights. If you have any questions, any comments, comment under the video, or reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'm always happy to listen and hear your feedback, any ideas, any discussions, anything you would like to help me, help you answer, any questions around the program, or any specific examples you want to share. Thank you for listening.